ballpark that you're looking at right now, this is the second oldest ballpark in the major leagues. Can anyone name the first oldest? Fenway, great. Yep, 1912. This was built in 1914. Now here's a trickier question. Can anyone name the third oldest ballpark in the major leagues? Right there in the back. That's right, Dodgers, 1962. Wow. So we're talking about a 50-year difference between the first and the third. So I guess you could say we're one of the OGs of the major league, right? So this ballpark wasn't always called Wrigley Field, and it wasn't always home to the Chicago Cubs. You see, the Chicago Cubs were actually on the west side, they were called the West Side Grounds, right by the United Center where the Bulls and the Blackhawks played. They weren't always called the Cubs, they actually were called the White Stockings. So they were the White Sox before the White Sox were the White Sox. Then they realized that was a stupid name for a team, so then they changed it. They went from being the Orphans and then to the Colts. Now when they were the Colts, members of the media would watch the games and they'd say, you know what, they kind of look like little Cubby Bears. They're tiny, young, scruffy. We're going to call them Cubs. And everyone caught on, except for the Colts. They hated it. They're like, no, you can't call us that. We're the Colts. They're like, nah, you're the Cubs. Sure enough, we relented and we became the Cubs. But that was all on the west side. On the south side, we had the White Sox at Old Comiskey, right? This whole area behind me was a Lutheran seminary. Now that's seminary, not cemetery. There's no dead people buried out there. Just my hopes and dreams. So this whole area of Lakeview actually was a suburb in the early 1900s. It was very quiet here, a perfect place for people to study at a Lutheran seminary. They ran out of luck because of the Chicago fire. Everyone started moving up north. They built the Red Line train. They put trolleys on Addison and Clark. It got real crazy up in here. And so they wanted out. Now we'll get back to them in just a minute. The whole story, all of this, it starts with one man. And his name is Charlie Wiegman, 1913. Now Charlie was a successful restaurant owner here in the city of Chicago. He owned a lot of diners throughout the city. He was very young and successful. The diners, they were kind of like Denny's, but with actual good food. And what they did was, his dream was to purchase the Cubs or the White Sox. He wanted to own one of them. But every single time he went to buy them, he got shut down. Why? Because they didn't like his personality. He was what they considered new money. He was kind of like the Mark Cuban of the time, right? Very young, very obnoxious, right? He tried 5 or 6 times to buy the Cubs and the White Sox, failed every time, until eventually he said, you know what? Fine, I'm starting my own league, and I'm starting my own baseball team. And sure enough, him and 7 other owners, they started the Federal League. So there's the National League, American League, and this outlaw league called the Federal League. Why was it called an outlaw league? Because what they would do is they would steal big name players from the National and American leagues, offer them huge contracts so that they could play for this tiny Federal League. So Charlie, his team was called the Chicago Federals. Real original, Charlie. But anyway, nonetheless, they played their first season in 1913 on the DePaul Fullerton campus. So if any of you have taken the Red Line or plan on taking the Red Line today, if you pass by the Fullerton stop, you'll find a little tiny baseball ballpark. That's where they played their first season. Now that ballpark was way too tiny for Charlie. Charlie wanted a ballpark that was going to outshine every single ballpark in the major leagues. So, we're back to the Lutherans, right? He comes up north, he finds this lot. He says, this is perfect. So he comes in and basically moves the Lutherans out. They built this ballpark in 5 weeks. You can't even get a permit for a water fountain in 5 weeks nowadays. But they did it. They did it. Now keep in mind, the 5 weeks was not spent building this mecca that we have here today. No, it was actually just this lower section of the seating bowl went all the way to third base and wrapped around to first base. There was a roof over top. And in the back, there was no wall, there were no bleachers, and there was no scoreboard. It was just a rope. That rope was held by Cubs employees. Now, if the ball went under the rope, it was a ground rule double. If it went over, it was a home run. So what do you think we did? Yep. Every time the Cubs are up to bat, we'd scooch up close, get it real low, score a lot of home runs. Other team was up to bat, we move it back about 40 feet, stretch it as far back as we could. Got away with that for a really long time. But needless to say, we had this ballpark, and we moved the Federals in 1914. They had a great season. They got second place out of the 8 teams, which isn't too bad, right? But Charlie wasn't satisfied. You see, the issue was that people didn't care. No one cared about the Federals. Everyone wanted to still see the Cubs and the White Sox. No one was filling in the seats. So what does he do? He puts a poll out into the city of Chicago. He's like, look, I'm gonna let people get invested in this team. I want them to pick the new team name for the Chicago Federals, because Federals is just not cutting it. So he puts a poll out into the city of Chicago. They count the ballots. They bring all the votes in, they count the ballots, and the winning team name is the Chicago Chickens. The Chicago Chickens. We think that the White Sox and the Cubs fans sort of stuffed the ballot on that one. So we did a little voter tampering, not that that's happened here before, and we went with the second best option, the Chicago Whales, or Whales. Now I know a lot of you are thinking, of course, there's a ton of whales in Lake Michigan, makes a ton of sense, right? No, what they did was, if you called someone a whale, it meant you had a lot of clout. You know, you're very ambitious, you were kind of the big guy on campus. That's what Charlie aspired to be. So they were the Whales. And they actually had a fantastic season. That next year, they won the Federal League Championship. 2 things. 1, the only championship to be won here in this ballpark. Soon to change. 2, a week or so after they won the championship, everyone's really excited. They're so excited for the Whales. The Federal League closes. So it folds. There's no more Federal League, no more Whales, just Charlie and this ballpark. So he's like, great, I got this ballpark, I don't have a team to play in here. It was just his luck that the Cubs were for sale one last time. Now he knew he couldn't purchase them on his own, right? He knew he was gonna get turned down. He needed a different strategy. So what he did was he teamed up with several of his richest investor friends, including a William Wrigley Jr., who we'll get to in a minute. They team up, they each put in $50,000, they have a pot of $500,000, and they go to visit the Taft family. The Taft family owns the Cincinnati Reds and the Chicago Cubs, the same Taft family that brought us the only president to get stuck in a bathtub, right? President Taft. So they went in with $500,000, they left with the Chicago Cubs, and in 1916, the Cubs played their first season here at Weigman Park. The ballpark was named after Charlie Weigman, right? So everyone's having a great time. The Cubs are great. The fans are finally filling the seats. Everyone's really happy, except for Charlie. See, Charlie runs out of luck. The Spanish flu spreads throughout the city of Chicago. And you know, as a restaurant owner, business is pretty rough if people are throwing up all over the place, right? So he started to lose all of his money. He had to sell his share of the stocks to William Wrigley Jr. William Wrigley Jr. earned his fortune from baking soda and soap. What they did as a promotion was, on the side of that baking soda and soap, they would stick a piece of bubble gum, banana flavored bubble gum, on the side. What they started realizing were people, they were buying the soap, taking the gum off, throwing away the soap, and eating the gum. That's how they switched over to the bubble gum industry. That banana flavored bubble gum is juicy fruit. So if any of you have had juicy fruit, you know, come on, Carlos, it doesn't taste like bananas. To them it did, and it drove them nuts, right? They were crazy about it. So William Wrigley Jr., he owns the team. He changes the name of the ballpark too. I got you. It's Cubs Park. Change it to Cubs Park. I promise you'll get the next one. So in the early 1920s, they changed it to Cubs Park. One of his executives for the Wrigley Company says to him, "Hey boss, look, I got an idea. Why don't you name it Wrigley Field? Because the red light train's right there. That's free advertising." So, sure enough, they changed the name of the ballpark to Wrigley. All right, awesome. So, he owns the team until on his deathbed, he says to his son, Philip Knight Wrigley, he says, "Son, I'm giving you the team, I'm giving you the ballpark, I'm giving you everything, you just have to make me a promise." And P.K. Wrigley says, "What's that, Dad?" He says, "You have to promise me you won't sell the team." P.K. Wrigley kept that promise all the way until on his deathbed, he says to his son, William Wrigley, "Do whatever you want. I don't care. Sell it. Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore." See, the thing with P.K. Wrigley was he was not a huge baseball guy. He didn't know the numbers. He didn't know much about the game. But what he did love was this ballpark. P.K. Wrigley is the reason why we have the ivy, the bleachers, the scoreboard, why it looks so nice, why we have this neighborhood feel to this ballpark. Everything you love about Wrigley Field, a majority of it is thanks to P.K. Wrigley, right? So, but he didn't like the game, and he didn't like that he was forced to keep the team, so he told his son, "Do whatever you want." And so eventually he sold the team to the Chicago Tribune in the 80s, and then when they started going under, they sold the team to the Ricketts family, who owns it today. Now, before we move on to the next section of the tour, I don't want to leave Charlie just yet. I feel like Charlie's one of the most underrated personalities in baseball and in sports, because a lot of the things that he introduced changed the way that we enjoy the game forever. For example, how many of you have caught a foul ball or a home run? Yeah? What did you do with the ball? Did you keep it? You kept it, right? Before Charlie, there were only 3 to 4 baseballs used per game. It was called the dead ball era. And what they would do is if you caught a foul ball or a home run, an usher would come up to you and say, "Hey, I need that." If you said no, they would charge you with theft and kick you out of the ballpark. Yep. So Charlie says, "That's ridiculous. I have enough money. I'll buy all the baseballs for everybody. They can keep it as a souvenir." That's what started the live ball era. Charlie Weekman is the reason you can keep a baseball after catching it, right? Now, concession stands. Charlie's the reason why concession stands are behind us. Because before Charlie, a handsome, debonair hot dog vendor like myself would walk through the aisles with a large hot dog machine, park it right in front of the fans for 30 to 45 minutes, cooking hot dogs in front of them. These poor guys in the front can't see the game. Charlie says that's silly, so they moved it to the back of the ballpark. That's why we have concession stands towards the back of all these ballparks. My favorite change, though, and the biggest one, during World War I, Charlie Weekman was of German descent, so he wanted to show his patriotism. During the 7th inning stretch, they sang the Star-Spangled Banner before it was our national anthem. The Boston Red Sox came to play a game here at Wrigley. It was Wrigley then. Came to play a game here at Wrigley. Or at Weekman Park, sorry. They came to play a game here at Weekman Park. They loved it so much, they brought it back to Fenway, and they moved it to the beginning of the game. And now we sing the Star-Spangled Banner before every sports game here in this country. That's because of Charlie. Charlie did that. So, we have a lot to thank for him. So, do you guys have any questions while we're down here? Yes?